I once thought the coldest thing on earth was the freezing Atlantic water my brother pushed me into. But lying in the emergency room, hearing my mother tell the police I had alcohol issues to explain my shattered ribs, I learned blood runs much colder. My family believed my silence could be bought with their millions. They had no idea my smartwatch recorded every single second of that night, and a flawless trap was already set. Hello, everyone. Before today's story begins, we'd like to share a quick message. YouTube recently removed our monetization, cutting off our income. If you enjoy this story, we humbly ask for just $1 to help pay our staff so they can make a living and keep creating for you. Thank you for saving us. Now let's begin the story. My name is Gabriella Daniels. I am 28 years old, and according to the High Society of Newport, Rhode Island, I am effectively a ghost. In a world where your worth is measured entirely by the carat of your diamonds and the pedigree of your last name, I chose to measure mine in pressure tolerances, sonar frequencies, and buoyancy algorithms. I work as a lead engineer at Thalassa Dynamics, a private cutting-edge firm specializing in deep ocean robotics. My hands are often stained with motor grease and saline, a stark, unforgiving contrast to the manicured, lotion-soft hands of my mother, Eleanor, and my father, Richard. They are the proud, unyielding architects of the Daniels shipping empire, a massive freight monolith that dominates the eastern seaboard of the United States. Our family estate is a sprawling, suffocating monument to new money, trying desperately to look old. It features imported Italian marble floors, towering crystal chandeliers, and a permanent staff trained to ignore the rotting foundation of our family dynamics. In the Daniels household, the sun rises and sets solely on my older brother Julian. He is 32 years old, impossibly handsome, and the flawless, hand-picked heir to the throne. He wears custom-tailored suits that cost more than most people earn in a year and wields a charismatic, rehearsed laugh designed to disarm investors and charm politicians. Whenever we host our extravagant summer charity galas, my parents parade Julian around the grand ballroom like a prize stallion. Julian just closed a $50 million logistics deal in Europe, my father would boast to a tight circle of state senators and greedy hedge fund managers swirling his expensive bourbon. Julian is the undeniable future of maritime trade. Meanwhile, if anyone ever bothered to ask about me, my mother would offer a tight, apologetic, almost pitying smile. "Gabriella is still playing with her little toy submarines," she would whisper behind her crystal champagne glass. "You know how she is. She lacks the stomach for real business. We just let her do her little science projects to keep her happy." I was the invisible outcast simply because I refused to inherit their gilded, morally bankrupt cage. I preferred the cold, honest, unyielding logic of machines over the treacherous, snake-filled waters of corporate handshakes. But the impenetrable illusion of our perfect, untouchable family began to fracture irreversibly on a rainy Tuesday evening. My personal high-performance laptop had completely fried its motherboard during a power surge, and I desperately needed to run a complex thermal simulation for a new deep-sea rover prototype before morning. I walked down the silent, carpeted hallway to Julian's private home office. He was supposedly away at a highly exclusive networking retreat in the Hamptons. His top-of-the-line desktop computer was sitting there glowing faintly in the dim room. I knew his password. It had been his birth year and his favorite sports car brand for the last 10 years. Julian was entirely predictable. I logged in intending only to borrow his processing power for 2 or 3 hours. As my engineering simulation began to compile, a strange notification popped up on his screen. It was an automated system alert regarding a failed synchronization for a local unmapped drive. My technical instincts immediately kicked in. I assumed it was a simple directory error, so I opened the file path to fix it so my program would not crash. Instead, I easily bypassed a poorly configured, arrogant little firewall and stumbled into a hidden, deeply buried folder labeled with a mundane, boring title like Archived Itineraries. The encryption masking it was laughably weak, exactly the kind of thing a wealthy amateur would use thinking he was invincible. I ran a standard decryption script I normally use for accessing locked underwater drone logs, and within 15 minutes the folder burst wide open. What I found inside made the blood drain instantly from my face, leaving me cold and shivering. It was definitely not a collection of travel plans. It was a massive secondary set of financial ledgers for the Daniels Shipping Fleet's Vital Maintenance Fund. I scrolled slowly through thousands of rows of raw data, my eyes straining, struggling to comprehend the massive gaping holes in the accounts. Julian was bleeding the family company dry. He was secretly siphoning off tens of millions of dollars into offshore accounts. I dug much deeper, tracing the poorly hidden routed shell companies, and uncovered a terrifying mountain of underground cryptocurrency gambling debts. Julian was losing astronomical sums on highly volatile digital coin bets and desperately covering his tracks by gutting the fleet's mandatory safety and repair budget. But the financial ruin, as staggering as it was not the worst part. I pulled up the heavily guarded procurement manifests for our newest, highly anticipated line of chemical transport vessels. Julian had deliberately canceled the long-standing contracts for military-grade corrosion-resistant titanium plating. Instead, to pocket the difference, he had secretly substituted the vital armor with cheap, hollow substandard metal alloys purchased from an unverified black market overseas vendor. These specific ships were designed to carry thousands of gallons of highly volatile, highly toxic industrial chemicals across the rough, unforgiving Atlantic Ocean. I am an engineer. I know exactly the devastating physics of what happens when you expose cheap hollow metal to highly corrosive acids and the immense crushing pressure of winter ocean swells. The math does not lie. It was not a matter of if the hulls would breach, but exactly when. Julian's desperate, pathetic theft was practically guaranteeing a catastrophic shipwreck. If those compromised vessels left the port next month as publicly scheduled, the resulting structural failure would cause a massive, unstoppable chemical spill. It would be a horrific maritime massacre, violently claiming the innocent lives of our hard-working crews and irreversibly poisoning thousands of miles of fragile ocean ecosystem. He was fully willing to sacrifice countless human lives and destroy the environment just to maintain his shiny image as the flawless golden boy. As I stared at the glowing screen, the air in the luxurious office suddenly felt entirely devoid of oxygen. My fingers flew across the keyboard, bypassing the remaining Surface directories. I pulled a military-grade encrypted solid-state drive from my backpack, a perk of working at Thalassa Dynamics, and jammed it into the USB port. The screen displayed a progress bar, agonizingly slow. I watched a staggering 2 terabytes of damning evidence transfer every bite a nail in the coffin of my brother's perfect facade. As soon as the transfer hit 100%, I yanked the drive out, wiped the access logs to the best of my ability, and slipped out of the room. The next morning, from the safety of my reinforced lab at Thalassa Dynamics, I plugged the drive into a secure offline terminal. I called Clara. Clara was my best friend and the most ruthless data analyst on our payroll. She was someone who could read raw code the way most people read a morning newspaper. I showed her the ledgers. For a long, suffocating silence, Clara stared at the monitor. When she finally spoke, her voice trembled. She told me the shell companies were routing funds to black market syndicates. She confirmed the structural integrity reports were entirely falsified. We both realized this was no longer just white-collar fraud. It was premeditated negligence that would cost hundreds of lives. But I had underestimated Julian. He was careless with his passwords, but he was incredibly paranoid about his territory. Sometime over the next 24 hours, an automated tripwire I had missed in the deep code must have alerted him. The shift in the atmosphere at the estate was immediate and terrifying. I felt it the moment I walked through the massive mahogany front doors. The ambient temperature in the house felt 10 degrees colder. Our family estate was wired with a state-of-the-art smart security system, boasting over 50 high-definition cameras covering every hallway, every entrance, and every blind spot. I started noticing the subtle mechanical whir of the lenses. The tiny red recording lights, which were usually dormant during the day, were now constantly active. Every time I walked from the kitchen to the conservatory, the camera heads physically swiveled, tracking my movements. Julian was watching me. He was sitting in some dark corner of the house, staring at his monitors, piecing together the timeline of his compromised firewall. The invisible walls of my childhood home suddenly felt like the damp, suffocating stones of a prison. The silent psychological warfare broke open on the night of my mother's annual maritime charity gala. Upstairs, the grand ballroom was overflowing with 500 wealthy guests, a sea of silk gowns and clinking champagne glasses. A string quartet played a lively symphony while my parents happily collected donations. I slipped away from the nauseating display of fake philanthropy, seeking refuge in the quiet, temperature-controlled basement corridor where the family kept the vintage wine collection. I did not hear his footsteps. Julian simply materialized from the shadows near the tasting room, blocking the narrow stone-arched exit. He was wearing a flawless tuxedo, a glass of amber whiskey in his hand, but his eyes were entirely feral. The charming golden boy mask was gone, replaced by something cold and predatory. "You have absolutely no idea what you have stepped into, Gabriella," Julian whispered. His voice was dangerously low, vibrating with suppressed rage. "You think you are so brilliant with your little machines, but you are playing a game with rules you do not understand. Give me the drive." I pressed my back against the cool stone wall, my heart hammering furiously against my ribs, but I forced my chin up. "I know exactly what I'm looking at, Julian. You replaced the titanium armor on the new chemical freighters with hollow junk. You are going to sink those ships to cover your gambling debts. You are going to kill those sailors." Julian took a slow, menacing step forward, invading my personal space. The smell of expensive cologne and alcohol radiated off him. "Those sailors know the risks when they sign the employment contracts. It is collateral damage for the greater good of this empire. The board will never believe a grease-stained outcast over me. Hand over the data right now, or I swear to God I will ruin your miserable little life." "You are not the empire," I shot back, my voice steadying, fueled by a sudden fierce surge of adrenaline. "You are just a thief in a very expensive suit. Here is how this is going to work. You have until 8 o'clock tomorrow morning to walk into our father's office, confess everything, and ground that fleet indefinitely. If you do not, or if you try to intimidate me again, I am sending the unredacted files to the entire board of directors, the Coast Guard, and the Federal Maritime Authorities. I will burn your reputation to the ground." I expected him to strike me. I braced for violence. But what happened next was far more disturbing. Julian froze. The anger instantly drained from his face, leaving him looking hollow and terrified. His shoulders slumped and he dropped his whiskey glass. It shattered against the stone floor, spraying liquor everywhere. He fell to his knees, burying his face in his hands, and began to violently sob. "You are right. Oh God, Gabby, you are right." His voice cracked thick with desperate tears. "I am in so deep. The syndicates are threatening my life. They said they would kill me if I did not pay by the end of the month. I panicked. I never wanted anyone to get hurt." I stared at him, caught entirely off guard by the sudden, pathetic display of vulnerability. The ruthless predator had vanished, leaving only a broken, terrified boy. "Please," Julian begged, looking up at me with red, tear-streaked eyes. "I will tell Dad. I will cancel the shipments. I promise you. I will do whatever you want. But I need your help to untangle the shell accounts before the feds see them, or I will go to federal prison for 20 years. Meet me at the private family dock tonight at 12 midnight. It is the only place the estate cameras cannot hear us. We will go over the hard drive together. We will figure out how to stop the ships without destroying the entire family. Please, Gabby. You are my sister. Save me." I looked down at his shaking hands. Against every logical instinct, I had a tiny, foolish sliver of sibling loyalty flickered in my chest. I gave him a single stiff nod. The salt air at 12 midnight was heavy and biting. I stood at the very edge of our private family dock, the dark woods slick with ocean mist. The waves of the Atlantic lashed against the pilings below, a rhythmic churning sound that usually brought me peace. Tonight it sounded like a warning. I gripped the thick leather strap of my heavy tote bag, feeling the reassuring weight of what I believed was the evidence inside. Julian emerged from the fog wearing a dark waterproof jacket, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. He looked around nervously, checking the perimeter where the estate security cameras could not reach. "Did you bring it?" he asked, his voice barely audible over the roaring tide. "I have the drive," I said, my voice steady, though the freezing wind bit through my thin coat. "Let us look at the logs. We need to figure out exactly how many millions you diverted before we go to Dad at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning." I reached into my bag. Julian closed the distance between us in 3 rapid, silent strides. He did not reach for the bag. Instead, his right hand whipped out from his jacket. A heavy, solid steel anchor winch bar gleamed dully in the moonlight. Before my brain could process the threat, he swung it with terrifying lethal force. The heavy steel connected directly with my left side. The sound of my ribs shattering was a sickening wet crunch that echoed over the crashing waves. A blinding explosion of white-hot agony ripped through my torso, stealing all the oxygen from my lungs. I collapsed to my knees, gasping, tasting warm metallic blood filling my mouth. The pain was absolute, consuming every nerve ending, paralyzing my vocal cords. Julian stood over me entirely unbothered. He calmly reached down and ripped the leather bag from my trembling fingers. He did not look angry anymore. He looked completely dead behind the eyes. "You always were too smart for your own good, Gabby," he whispered coldly. He placed the flat sole of his heavy leather boot squarely against my bleeding chest. "Goodbye." He shoved hard. I tumbled backward into the absolute void. The shock of the black Atlantic water hitting my broken body was indescribable. It was not just cold. It was a physical assault, a million icy needles piercing my skin simultaneously. The temperature was barely above freezing, maybe 32 degrees Fahrenheit, and it instantly paralyzed my muscles. I opened my mouth to scream, but the freezing salt water violently rushed down my throat, choking me. My heavy winter clothes became an anchor, dragging me down into the crushing pitch-black depths. Every desperate attempt to kick my legs sent waves of excruciating torture radiating from my shattered ribcage. I was drowning. My vision began to narrow, the edges turning a fuzzy dark gray. I felt my lungs burning, convulsing, begging for air that did not exist down there. The last thing I registered before the darkness swallowed me entirely was the faint rhythmic churning of the ocean, indifferent to the life it was taking. I do not know how many minutes I drifted in that watery grave. The next sensation was a chaotic blur of harsh, blinding searchlights piercing my closed eyelids, the frantic shouting of the Coast Guard patrol, and the brutal, jarring impact of being hauled over the rigid edge of a rescue boat. They tore my soaked clothes away, shouting medical codes, performing frantic chest compressions that ground my broken bones together. Reality became a fragmented nightmare of fluorescent hospital lights, the screeching wheels of a gurney, and the chaotic symphony of cardiac monitors. I was floating in and out of consciousness in the intensive care unit, trapped in a body that felt entirely destroyed. I suffered from massive blunt force trauma, multiple compound fractures in my ribs, a punctured left lung, and severe hypothermia. I was hooked up to a dozen different machines, a thick plastic ventilator tube forced down my throat, rendering me completely mute. Through the heavy haze of strong intravenous painkillers, I heard the door swing open. I could not turn my head, but I could hear his voice. Julian. He was weeping. It was a loud, theatrical, gut-wrenching wail of pure devastation. "Is she going to live?" "Please, doctor, you have to save my little sister. I tried to grab her. I swear I tried," he cried out, his voice cracking with artificial grief. It was the performance of a lifetime, flawlessly executed to paint himself as the traumatized hero who had desperately plunged into the freezing ocean to save me. Less than 45 minutes later, the unmistakable clicking of my mother's expensive designer heels echoed in the sterile hallway. She and my father had arrived, but they did not run to my bedside. They brought an army with them. I heard the sharp, low whispers of our family's senior legal counsel and crisis management executives. They were not there to comfort a dying daughter or demand an investigation into an attempted murder. They were there to build a fortress around the Daniels shipping stock price before the New York Stock Exchange opened at 9:30 in the morning. Two local police detectives were standing just outside my curtained partition. My mother Eleanor spoke to them. Her tone was the perfect mix of maternal sorrow and aristocratic composure. "Officers, you must understand, my daughter has been under an immense amount of pressure at work," my mother said softly, her voice trembling just enough to sound authentic. "Gabriella has always struggled with severe alcohol dependency issues. We have tried to get her help for years. Tonight she drank heavily at our charity gala. She was disoriented, deeply depressed. She wandered out to the docks alone and simply slipped. Julian saw her fall from the balcony and risked his own life jumping into the freezing water to pull her out, but the current was just too strong. It was a tragic, terrible accident." Tears streamed silently down my bruised, swollen face, burning against the raw scrapes on my cheeks. I was lying right there fighting for every single manufactured breath, and my own mother was assassinating my character to protect the monster who tried to kill me. Blood was supposedly thicker than water, but in the Daniels family, money was the only lifeblood that mattered. The detectives murmured their sympathies, completely buying the polished lie, and left the ward. The heavy hospital door clicked shut, leaving only the rhythmic hissing of my ventilator. My father Richard walked slowly to the side of my bed. The room was deathly quiet. He leaned over me. I stared up into his cold, calculating eyes. There was no warmth, no relief that I had survived. He looked at my broken, battered body, the same way he looked at a damaged cargo container that was costing him profit margins. He placed his large, heavy hand flat against the clean white sheets inches from my strapped-down arm. "Listen to me very carefully, Gabriella." My father whispered, his voice a flat, emotionless razor blade. "The police have ruled this an unfortunate alcohol-induced accident. The media is running the story exactly as we dictated. When the doctors finally remove that tube from your throat, you will nod your head and confirm every single word your mother said." I squeezed my eyes shut, but his voice bored into my skull. "If you even think about contradicting this narrative," he continued smoothly, "if you breathe a single word of your ridiculous little delusions to anyone, you will regret surviving tonight. I will personally freeze every bank account you have. I will cancel your premium health insurance, leaving you to drown in medical debt. I will ensure Thalassa Dynamics fires you before lunch, and I will thoroughly blacklist you from every engineering firm in the country. You will have $0, zero credibility, and zero family. Do we understand each other?" I opened my eyes, the harsh fluorescent lights blinding me. I was a prisoner inside my own ruined body, suffocating beneath the crushing weight of their immense wealth and power. But as my father turned and walked away, adjusting his expensive tie, a tiny hard knot of pure, unadulterated hatred began to form in the very center of my chest. It was a dark, quiet fire burning hotter than the freezing ocean that had failed to claim me. I was transferred to the hospital's ultra-exclusive VIP recovery wing on the 4th floor. It was nothing more than a luxury prison cell. Two private security contractors hired by my father stood outside my heavy wooden door 24 hours a day. They were ostensibly there to protect me from the intrusive media, but I knew their real purpose was to ensure no unauthorized personnel spoke to me. When the doctors finally removed the ventilator tube from my raw, aching throat, I knew exactly what I had to do. I had to play the game better than they did. When Julian and my parents visited the following afternoon, I put on a flawless performance of a completely broken woman. I sobbed uncontrollably, avoiding their eyes. When my mother loudly reiterated her fabricated story about my drunken fall, I simply nodded my head, tears streaming down my face. I let my voice crack as I apologized for being such a burden to the family. Julian practically glowed with smug satisfaction. He patted my bandaged shoulder with a gentle brotherly touch that made my stomach violently churn. They left the room utterly convinced that I had surrendered, completely confident that their iron grip over my life was secure. But they failed to account for the one variable they could not buy: scientific truth. The turning point arrived 3 days later in the form of Dr. Marcus Evans. He was a visiting thoracic surgeon from Boston, entirely independent of the Daniels family influence. He was a man of science, not society. Late one evening, he walked into my room holding a digital tablet. He carefully closed the door and drew the heavy blinds. His face was entirely unreadable as he approached my bed. "Ms. Daniels," Dr. Evans said, keeping his voice incredibly low, "I have been reviewing your high-resolution X-rays. The official police report states you suffered these fractures from striking the surface of the water after a high-altitude fall." I remained silent, staring at him. Terrified, the room was bugged. Dr. Evans stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. "I have treated hundreds of severe trauma patients. Water impact disperses force across a wide surface area. The localized shatter pattern on your 4th, 5th, and 6th ribs tells a completely different story. The impact zone is less than 2 inches wide. The fracture angles clearly indicate a massive concentrated blow from a heavy, narrow, solid object. A steel pipe, perhaps, or a metal bar." My breath caught in my throat. I looked at the security camera mounted in the corner of the ceiling. It was currently emitting a steady red glow. Dr. Evans followed my gaze. He reached into his white coat and pulled out a small black electronic device. "I know who your family is. I know how they operate. But my oath is to my patient, not their stock portfolio. I am going to activate an infrared scrambler. It will blind the camera lens and loop the audio feed for exactly 15 minutes. After that, the system will flag an error. You have a very small window." He pressed a button on the device. The red light on the camera instantly flickered and turned a solid, dull green. Dr. Evans handed me his personal smartphone and walked to the door to keep watch. My hands shook violently as I dialed the only number I knew by heart. It rang twice before Clara answered. Her voice was frantic and sharp. She demanded to know if I was alive. "Clara, listen to me." I rasped, the pain in my chest flaring with every syllable. "I have less than 14 minutes. Julian tried to kill me. He hit me with a winch bar and threw me off the dock." I heard a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. Clara did not waste time crying. She shifted instantly into battle mode. "Tell me what you need me to do." "I was wearing my biometric smartwatch that night," I explained quickly. "The physical watch is sitting at the bottom of the ocean, but the device is programmed to automatically sync its data to my secure cloud server every 10 minutes via cellular networks. You need to breach my personal cloud storage and extract the data package from the night of the attack." I gave her the complex alphanumeric decryption keys. Through the phone, I could hear the furious, rapid clicking of her mechanical keyboard. 3 agonizing minutes passed. "I am in," Clara announced, her voice trembling slightly. "Gabby, this is unbelievable. I have the entire health log. Your heart rate spiked to 180 beats per minute right before the fall. The accelerometer data shows a massive sudden G-force impact on your left side, but that is not all. Your watch has an ambient noise detection feature for sleep tracking. It was active." "Play it," I whispered. Through the tiny phone speaker, I heard the chilling, undeniable sound of the Atlantic waves, then a harsh metallic thud, a sickening crack, and clear as day, Julian's cold, arrogant voice echoed into the room. "You always were too smart for your own good, Gabby. Goodbye." "I have him," Clara said, her voice dropping to a fierce, dangerous whisper. "I have his exact voice, the exact timestamp, the exact biometric proof of the assault. But Gabby, the police will ask about the motive. Without the financial files, it is just his word against yours regarding why you were out there." I let out a slow, painful breath, a small, grim smile touching my bruised lips. "Clara, do you honestly think I would bring the real evidence to a midnight meeting with a desperate man?" Silence hung on the line for a second. "What do you mean?" "The leather bag Julian stole from me only contained a dummy hard drive filled with 300 gigabytes of classical music. I revealed feeling the first true surge of power since the attack. The real unencrypted drive with all of Julian's shell companies, the gambling debts, and the falsified titanium contracts is perfectly safe. Go to my lab at Thalassa Dynamics. Open the primary workbench. Look for the dismantled Mark 7 diving robot. I hid the real drive inside the waterproof lithium battery core 2 days ago. You brilliant paranoid engineer! Clara breathed a fierce laugh escaping her. Gather the financial drive and bundle it with the smartwatch audio and the biometric data. I instructed, my eyes locked on the digital clock on the wall. Do not go to the local police. They are bought. We wait for the right moment. Get everything ready. Dr. Evans turned from the door, tapping his wrist. Our time was up. I have to go, I said. I deleted the call history from the phone and handed it back to the surgeon, just as he switched off the scrambler. The camera's red light blinked back to life, resuming its silent watch. I lay back against the pillows, closing my eyes and letting out a soft, defeated sigh for the camera's benefit. But beneath the blanket, my hands curled into tight, unyielding fists. Julian thought he had buried me in the cold water. He had no idea he had simply baptized a monster of his own making. 2 weeks after the incident, the hospital officially discharged me. I was not allowed to return to my own quiet apartment. My father dispatched his private security team to escort me directly back to the family estate. They placed me in the East Wing guest suite, essentially putting me under heavily guarded house arrest. It was a beautiful, incredibly spacious room featuring heavy silk curtains and a lovely view of the manicured gardens. However, it was completely soundproofed and entirely devoid of any electronic devices. My phone, my laptop, and even the digital clock on the nightstand had been meticulously removed. 2 private nurses rotated shifts outside my door, ensuring I never wandered the halls. I was completely cut off from the outside world. This was standard operating procedure for the Daniels family. The highly anticipated annual shareholder meeting was exactly 7 days away, and they absolutely could not risk their unstable, injured daughter going rogue and ruining the narrative. My mother, Eleanor, visited me every single afternoon. She never came empty-handed, treating my silence like a commodity to be purchased. On Monday, she brought a solid gold Cartier bracelet. On Tuesday, she presented a rare vintage silk scarf. On Wednesday, she finally sat on the edge of my bed, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She looked at me with a perfectly practiced expression of maternal concern. "Gabriella, darling," she began, her voice smooth and comforting like poisoned honey. "Your father and I want to ensure you are thoroughly taken care of. We know how much you love your little engineering firm. We have drawn up a contract. If you agree to sit in front of a camera tomorrow and record a short, sincere video confirming that your fall was entirely due to your unfortunate intoxication, we will purchase a 45% stake in Thalassa Dynamics. We will fully fund your underwater research for the next 10 years. It is a massive win for everyone. You get your precious lab and the family name remains untarnished before the big vote." I looked down at my heavily bandaged hands, intentionally letting my shoulders slump to project absolute defeat. I forced my breathing to shudder and allowed a single tear to roll down my bruised cheek. "Okay, Mother," I whispered softly, sounding entirely broken. "I will do the video. I just want this nightmare to be over." She smiled warmly, patted my knee, and left the room feeling completely victorious. The next morning, they brought a professional lighting crew and a corporate lawyer into my bedroom. I stared into the camera lens and flawlessly delivered the exact lines they had written for me, claiming full responsibility for my drunken clumsiness. What they did not know was that before I left the hospital, Dr. Evans had helped me secure my custom-molded chest splint. Molded right into the dense, rigid polymer lining was a highly specialized military-grade microtransmitter. I had engineered it myself several months ago for deep-sea data bursts where traditional signals failed. By pressing a specific sequence of hidden pressure plates against my ribs, I could transmit pre-programmed, heavily encrypted data packets via low-frequency radio waves. That night, under the cover of darkness, I tapped out the final activation codes against my own broken bones. It sent a simple silent signal directly to Clara's secure server. The message contained the final GPS coordinates of the upcoming shareholder meeting and the ultimate decryption key for the financial drive. The trap was formally locked. As the week progressed, and my video was quietly circulated to key investors to calm their nerves, Julian's initial paranoia completely evaporated. It was rapidly replaced by a sickening, bloated arrogance. He felt entirely invincible. He started carelessly flaunting the stolen money right in front of my face. On Friday evening, exactly 24 hours before the grand meeting, he strolled into my room wearing a brand-new custom-tailored suit. He casually adjusted his cuffs, revealing a ridiculously flashy diamond-encrusted watch that easily cost $500,000. He poured himself a glass of water from my nightstand, took a slow sip, and leaned in close to my face. The heavy smell of his expensive cologne made my stomach violently turn. "You actually did incredibly well on that video yesterday, Gabby," he whispered, a cruel, mocking smirk playing on his lips. "Very convincing tears. It is almost sad how easily you folded when you realized you had zero power. Tomorrow morning, Dad is officially naming me the new Chief Executive Officer in front of 500 shareholders and the national business press. And you? You will be sitting right here in this quiet room playing the good broken little sister. Enjoy the gold bracelets." I simply looked away, staring blankly at the wall, letting him bathe in his false victory. Let him think I was a ghost. While Julian was busy admiring his own reflection, the real world was shifting beneath his feet. At exactly 8 o'clock that same night, Clara walked boldly through the heavily guarded glass doors of the Federal Bureau of Investigation's regional field office in Boston. She did not come alone. She had aggressively arranged a joint meeting with the top investigative agents from the Federal Maritime Crime Division. She slammed a massive, thick black binder onto the lead agent's desk. It contained every single printed financial ledger, the catastrophic structural failure reports of the new chemical transport vessels, and the sworn, legally binding medical affidavit from Dr. Evans, detailing the exact nature of my blunt force trauma. Finally, she handed them a secure titanium flash drive. "Listen to the audio file first," Clara told the stunned federal agents, her voice laced with pure steel. "Then look at the shell company routing numbers. I am here to report a premeditated attempted murder and a massive catastrophic corporate conspiracy orchestrated by the Daniels shipping empire." The grand ballroom of the Newport Plaza Hotel was packed to absolute capacity by 10 o'clock on Saturday morning. 500 of the most powerful Maritime Investors board members and national financial journalists sat in the plush velvet chairs, waiting for the historic announcement. The stage was brightly illuminated, flanked by 2 massive digital projection screens displaying the gleaming, flawless logo of the Daniels shipping empire. The entire event was being broadcast live across major financial news networks. My father stood confidently at the polished acrylic podium, wearing his finest tailored suit. He beamed with unearned pride as he gestured toward Julian, who was sitting in the front row, looking like a polished, untouchable king. "For 4 generations, our family has navigated the most treacherous economic waters," my father announced into the microphone, his voice booming with authority. "Today, I am incredibly proud to formally announce my retirement. I am passing the ultimate torch to my son. Effective immediately, Julian will take over as the new chief executive officer of this great corporation." The crowd erupted into thunderous applause. Julian stood up, buttoned his jacket, and began walking up the carpeted stairs to accept his crown. He never made it to the microphone. A deafening, high-pitched screech of audio feedback suddenly ripped through the ballroom speakers, causing hundreds of guests to cover their ears in pain. The live broadcast feed on the 2 massive screens abruptly cut to black. A second later, the screens flashed back to life, but they were no longer showing the company logo. Clara had successfully bypassed the hotel's audiovisual network. Brilliant, undeniable high-definition images flooded the massive screens. It was a rapid, inescapable slideshow of the raw offshore bank statements, the illegal cryptocurrency ledgers, and the stark, terrifying photographs of the cheap hollow metal alloys that Julian had secretly purchased for the chemical transport fleet. The documents were heavily annotated with giant red circles highlighting the stolen millions. Before the confused murmurs of the crowd could evolve into a panic, the visual presentation stopped, replaced by a single pulsing audio waveform. The chilling ambient sounds of a violently crashing ocean echoed through the silent ballroom. Then came the heavy metallic thud, the agonizing sound of shattering bone, and a voice every single person in the room immediately recognized. "You always were too smart for your own good, Gabby. Goodbye." The entire ballroom froze in absolute horrified silence. Julian stopped dead on the stairs, all the color instantly draining from his face. He looked like a ghost. He frantically waved his arms at the sound technicians in the back of the room, screaming at them to cut the power. But the control booth was already locked from the inside by Clara's automated malware. The audio clip looped, playing his murderous confession a second time, louder and clearer, directly onto the live national television feed. Then the heavy mahogany double doors at the back of the ballroom violently burst open. Over 40 armed federal agents and local police officers swarmed into the hall, their tactical boots echoing like thunder against the marble floor. They completely ignored the screaming, panicking investors. The lead agent marched straight down the center aisle directly toward the stage. "Julian Daniels," the agent shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. "You are under arrest for attempted murder, wire fraud, and severe violations of federal maritime safety regulations." Julian completely broke down. The polished, arrogant air collapsed onto the stage, violently thrashing and weeping loudly as two heavy-set officers pinned his arms behind his back and locked cold steel handcuffs around his wrists. He begged for his father to do something, screaming that it was all a massive misunderstanding. But my father could not save him. Richard Daniels was slumped heavily over the podium, clutching his chest in pure shock, his face purple with humiliation. My mother Eleanor sat frozen in the front row, covering her mouth with her trembling, manicured hands, her perfectly crafted social empire burning to ash right before her eyes. The major shareholders surrounding them did not offer sympathy. They were viciously turning on my parents, aggressively shouting obscenities and threatening massive multi-million-dollar class action lawsuits right there on the floor. The family stock price was already plummeting to zero in real time. Their money, their power, and their untouchable privilege evaporated in less than 3 minutes. Suddenly, the chaotic shouting near the front entrance died down, parting like the Red Sea. I walked slowly into the grand ballroom. I was leaning heavily on a sleek black carbon fiber cane, my ribs still tightly bound beneath a sharp-tailored navy suit. I did not look broken. I looked like absolute steel. I walked deliberately down the center aisle. Every camera flashed in my direction. I stopped at the edge of the stage, looking down at Julian, who was weeping pathetically on his knees, and then shifted my cold gaze to my utterly destroyed parents. A reporter near the front desperately shoved a microphone toward me. I looked directly into the camera lens, my voice steady, ringing with absolute finality. The only accident here is everyone's delusion that I would die in silence. 8 months later, the freezing Atlantic wind whipped through my hair, but this time it felt incredibly warm. I stood on the reinforced